to Healing Solidarity, the conference about reimagining international development. I'm Marianne Clements, initiator of this conference, a writer and consultant, and facilitator of the Replenishment Room. And in this conversation, I talk with Swatee Deepak, director of STARS Foundation, about how their work supports grassroots activists internationally and why supporting healing and well-being is something they're exploring both internally amongst her team and in the support that they offer to the organisations who are in receipt of their funding. I think this is a really interesting take on how an organisation can implement some of the ideas in this conference into their practice. I hope you'll enjoy the conversation as much as we enjoyed having it today. So hi, I'm here with Swatee Deepak, who's at STARS Foundation, and I'm just going to ask her to tell us a bit about STARS Foundation.
Sure. So hi, thank you so much for letting me be part of this this great kind of convening. So I'm Swatee, I'm director of STARS Foundation. STARS is an independent charitable foundation based in the UK. We fund local and grassroots organisations around the world working in children and young people's rights, and we do that through an awards-based methodology, and the reason that we do an award is about recognising that grassroots organisations are at the forefront of international development. All the problems that we're seeing in the world, actually a lot of the issues are being dealt with at a grassroots level, and it's a sad fact that actually a lot of formal funding from multilaterals, bilaterals, governments and private funders don't really reach the grassroots. So ours is really about recognising those. And, you know, we run two specific programmes. One is the Impact Awards, which is around recognising children and young people focused organisations. And the other is a collective with 8 other funders called the With and For Girls Collective. And this is really about recognising that, you know, across elements of education, of health, of modern day slavery, of sexual and reproductive health and rights, of access to kind of economic empowerment and economic independence. Across all those spectrums, adolescent girls are the most kind of affected group globally by age and by the gender disaggregation, and yet only 0.2 cents of every dollar in formal aid goes towards adolescent girls. So we came together as a collective to find and fund adolescent girl-led organizations. So these are organizations being led by you know, young girls in their teens or young women in their early 20s, or a grassroots organization that really demonstrates they are taking on board the management, the leadership, the decisions of adolescent girls in the way that they develop programs that are for them. So it's really about, why do we see it so radical to keep girls away from the decision-making table? And this is our active contribution towards doing that. So STARS manages the With and For Girls Collective alongside 8 other funders, as I mentioned, right, including people like Comic Relief, Novo Foundation, Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, Mama Cash, and others.
Cool. I've always been really interested in the, you know, since I heard about STARS years and years ago, the sort of award-based nature of it, because it's kind of, I think, a bit unusual, like we're not used to that. And I love that it just basically means that then I'm assuming it means that then that's unrestricted money that people can choose how they use and what they do with. So there's flexibility for them as well, which is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really came from actually, so our funding comes from a high net worth founder. And I think at the time he was really, you know, he looked at it from sort of a philanthropic, but also a business perspective. And he was like, you know, when I fund solutions in businesses, I, you know, assess the organization and then I just give them an investment and they make the decisions on what they then do with it. And he wanted to do the same thing with, you know, he said, I want to fund children and young people, I want to get funding to local organizations, and I want to give them unrestricted funding. And sadly at the time, like, and this was, you know, back in 2001, when I guess the concept of flexible funding wasn't as sort of prominent within the funding sector as it is maybe now.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was really like, he went to philanthropic advisors and different people being like, well, you know, these organizations don't exist, or you can't trust them. It's better if you put your money into, like, you know, big kind of INGOs or big development agencies that exist if you really want to meet this problem. And I think there was this real sort of reticence about that. Well, actually, no, like, they do exist, and we want to find them. We want to amplify the fact that they do exist. They deserve the recognition for the work that they're doing. They are trustworthy, and we'll prove that by finding them, by amplifying the work that they're doing, and by then giving them our unrestricted funding, sort of putting our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
And I think that what we've really seen is just, like, you know, seeing how organizations at the grassroots mobilize, how they're conceived, how they're resourced by people in the community, how they work so intertwined with the local community in a way that other development actors don't. I think that, you know, flexible funding is just such an important thing that I think runs across the veins of me personally, but also like my entire team and the organization as well, is the fact that actually, you know, and I was thinking, just going back to the question around what must change in international development, I think there is this sort of sense of, we really do need to focus on local leadership and giving them the autonomy, the recognition for the work that they do first and foremost, but also then trusting them with that and recognizing for them with that, with unrestricted funding, so they can make decisions about how they address issues in their community, how they can innovate around the changing nature of whatever's happening in their community. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it must be such a relief for the people that get funding from you to be able to make their own decisions about what they do with it, because I always feel this thing of like having to check in with people when, you know, you change a budget line slightly and stuff, always feels really just counterproductive and unhelpful, you know.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's something there around, you know, like, at the end, you know, some of the groups that we support, and all of them are like incredible in each of their own unique ways.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting is, you know, when you see either the work they're doing, you know, they're working with children who've been sexually exploited, who've been victims of violence, that are growing up in occupied regions, in war zones, in post-war zones, you know, or are suffering intense trauma, you know, or are completely marginalized because, you know, they have disabilities and so on. There's just such a plethora of like what these groups are trying to do. And when you think about the fact that they're doing that in a local community that might have stigmas, that might have a society that actually perpetuates some of those issues or allows for them to happen. There's no government interventions, there's no welfare interventions. It's an isolated issue. When you're working on something like that, it's so all-consuming for you as individuals, as teams, as organizations, to then have to like justify why you need to spend your funding in a certain way to a team that's based in London that has no idea what the context is in rural Vietnam or rural Cameroon, or what the situation is like in a refugee camp in Syria or in occupied Palestinian territories. You know, I think that there's this real shift that we need to be considering as funders around how to really support organizations in the best way that they deserve to be supported. Like, is it about us being a bit like, well, we'd like you to fund it in this way and to only spend across this items, and you know, if they need to gain permission from us on every single change and checking everything and being scared to do that and not have that open relationship, is that a relationship that's of trust? Like, in our sector, people talk about having partners, you know, like we have local partners, we support local partners, but like partnership is a really equal relationship. It's about both organizations being able to trust one another, that are able to challenge one another, that are able to be vulnerable in front of one another. And I just think that, like, you know, there is an inherent power balance that exists in philanthropy. You've got money and therefore power, and you're giving it to those that don't have that money and therefore that power. And of course there's a power balance, but at least trying to start towards moving towards a level playing field is about creating an environment where that trust is equalized in a way that actually allows that organization to do its job and to thrive, and for you, the funder, to actually get the results and see the impact that you're wanting to see, without that sort of power imbalance being used and being, I guess, just solidified by, you know, like, well, you need to check everything with us and we won't allow you to spend it on these things. And of course, like, you know, even for us, like, we do give flexible funding. We still have to remain compliant with the UK Charity Commission. We have to make, you know, we have to make sure that the organisation is being compliant with its own local laws and legislations, and that's absolutely fine. I'm not suggesting we challenge any of those elements, but we should be giving as much of that flexibility as possible. And I think, you know, just on the topic of like healing and solidarity with supporting your, you know, grantees and grassroots and local leaders and organizations are really trusting them. I think what we've also just seen is that, you know, the people that are working in human rights and social justice areas, you know, they, like, the work that they're doing, it forms such a huge part of their identity. You know, they live and breathe it. If they're fighting for, you know, ending child marriage, so many of them have either been victims of it personally or through family or friends. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm talking about from a grassroots perspective, you know, working on those issues. And so for them to be able to disengage from that kind of the emotional toll of working on quite traumatic issues and having to fight it and investing in your time. And, you know, we all work hard, we all pull, you know, the kind of late nights when we need to, you know, everyone feels stressed in their jobs. Of course they do. But I feel like those organizations and those of us working maybe in the social justice area, it's harder to disengage that stress and that toll from your personal, you know, life and your professional life. There's a blend, because actually you're fighting for something that your true core and your true value you really believe is important and needs to have a change seen. And so I think what we've been seeing is that so many of our local organizations, you know, the leaders of those, staff within those, you know, it's just very difficult for them to be able to disengage themselves from that part of their identity. And I think it really takes a toll on their well-being, their well-being being their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, and also, like, in some elements, some of their spiritual health and that side as well. And, you know, they, in the situations that they're dealing in, they can just become so overwhelmed, they can become anxious, their work becomes all assuming. And so we've been really thinking as funders around, okay, well, if we do want to support these organizations, if we, you know, and we do give our flexible funding for those reasons I mentioned before, about trusting and about recognizing and about trying to address that unlevel playing field that we are in at the moment as funders and grantees. But if the other thing that we do is we support capacity development of organizations, recognizing that small local organizations obviously don't have access to the same type of resources or the same capacity as maybe organizations that can fly in, you know, their sort of technical assistance from Europe or from North America, or they can't, or they don't necessarily have the financial means to be able to hire, like, you know, a whiz-bang fundraiser or strategy consultant that, you know, that's worked in the capital of their country, or work, you know, overseas, or has a fancy degree. And so, you know, like, we do recognize that. And I think, you know, we've done lots of support for our organizations in areas like monitoring and evaluation, in fundraising, in income generation, in strategy development. But actually, like, from sort of the feedback that we've got from our grantees themselves, it's really been about, you know, a lot of them go on these trainings. They actively want to do this, and, you know, they will do it, but are they doing it with, you know, with addressing their full selves as well, and being like able to be fully present sort of within that framing, you know? And how many of us have gone to a conference or training session, sorry, and been you know, got a whole list of things that we should be doing, being like, yeah, totally got to do that, and then you go back and you're still so overwhelmed by the work yourself that you've still got your desk that just slides. And it happens, you know, when a deadline approaches, you're like, okay, well, I have to do this for my boss, for my board, for my founder, you know, and I went on that training, so I have to prove that I've done that. But are you really present in really thinking about that having a transformational change on the capacity of your entire organization and the way that it really lives its values? And so just thinking about that, we, you know, we're talking to our grantees about what would be, and we don't actually refer to them as grantees. I don't know why I'm using that language. We actually say winners. You know, they are winning organisations.
Right.
And so we were speaking to our winners and saying, you know, what kind of things can be helpful? What are you guys dealing with? And we heard actually from one of our grantees that's based in Bolivia, and you know, the founder of the organisation is a young woman, and when she actually suffered sexual abuse and sexual exploitation at the hands of someone in her family while she was a very, very young girl. And, you know, there is a system in Bolivia that supports children or girls to be able to heal and move from that and address those issues even from a legal and a political perspective, like in the context. And so she set up this organization to support other groups. And they work through, you know, various mediums of whether it's legal support or rehabilitation, but obviously within the rehabilitation, counselling and that kind of support for victims of sexual abuse who are very young children and girls going through that. And, you know, she said that actually one thing that I'd like to suggest for some of the other grantees and for you guys to consider is that, you know, we had a former actually member of the With and For Girls collective from Empower, a lady called Carmen. You know, she's got an MBA, she's worked for very big foundations like Nike and Empower, you know, understands our sector, but, you know, had also trained as a coach, as a yoga teacher, as a nutritional therapist, and, you know, had left her kind of role in formal philanthropy to look at, okay, well, how do we address and propel social justice that isn't just about being funders, but actually addresses people at the center of these movements and these organizations. And, you know, was her like Carmen's family was from the same hometown as this organization. It's called A Breeze of Hope in Bolivia, in Cochabamba. And, you know, had gone to the town, had been their sort of program officer for Girls Award, so knew them really well, and said, you know, I'm going to be in town seeing my family, and, you know, I've just started this new thing, but if there's anything I can help with, you know, I'd love to be able to volunteer or spend some time with the organization. And so, you know, in Carmen's head, she was thinking, even with starting on this journey of working with organizations, you know, thought, and, you know, was reflecting on it afterwards, that, you know, I thought that, you know, this organization probably needs me to support them on some strategy development or fundraising or links to kind of overseas networks that funders have access to. Right. And actually the organization was like, you know, we can get all of those things, but tell us about this sort of journey around supporting like the well-being and the healing of our team and the work that we do. And then they started on a process of the executive director and all of the main team, including like the counsellors, that are obviously dealing with daily trauma, you know, with children who've gone through trauma themselves. And, you know, the ED fed back that intervention was so transformational because it actually addressed all of their team members as individuals, managed the stresses that they were feeling, not just in the workplace, but around it, that were obviously all coming together to really impact those individuals. And of course, you know, they weren't noticing any problems as such in the organization. It wasn't like they were dealing with that as an issue. But I think the fact that they had that foresight and they had that space to be able to experiment with something that is about addressing the core of an organization isn't your strategy, it isn't your fundraising, it isn't your M&E systems, or even to some extent your programs, it's the people that sit behind them. And I think we often forget that our social justice movements are propelled by people at their core. And you know, the feedback from this local organisation, one of the winners of the Within for Girls Awards, was, you know, if there was anything that I can recommend to other grantees to do, it's to do something like this, you know, with a consultant that, you know, or an individual that you know, that you click with, that your team click with in the same way. And so, you know, we were thinking about, well, we as funders offer capacity development support to our grantees, and in the past, as I said, we've funded things like fundraising and child protection and M&E training, and of course all of those things are still extremely important and will still stay on the radar for us. But actually we also have the flexibility to be able to take risks and to pilot and trial things, especially when if you're embracing that kind of element of the true partnership with the organizations, you want, if they're telling you this is really important, we need this address, and this is a solution we found that we want others to have access to and awareness of, then of course, in the spirit of true partnership, we have a full responsibility to explore that for other winners. And so, yeah, we spoke to Carmen. She obviously knows our program really well. She knows our grantees really well. And she's worked with, you know, someone we've just actually yesterday and in English, and then for the English speakers, and today for Spanish speakers, launched a pilot program with all of the 60 winners of the Within for Girls Awards so far, who are based across 41 countries, and they range from, we've got some in Bristol in the UK and Chicago in the US and Barbados and Syria and El Salvador and Cameroon and Samoa and Hong Kong and the Philippines and Pakistan. Like, they're absolutely everywhere. Chechnya, Kyrgyzstan, and you know, they're absolutely everywhere. But we're opening up like this sort of, over the next 6 months, if you know, are interested in this, and you can commit to obviously the time frame of having several coaching sessions and days with your team as well to be able to implement this, then, you know, we're really happy to give that as a form of the support that award winners receive and part of the awards package as well. And we're really, really interested to see, you know, what comes of that, like whether those elements are sort of like that feedback that we receive from A Breeze of Hope is consistent from other organizations. And, you know, what we've also seen is that other members of the collective, so Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, another funder and a member of the Within for Girls Collective, you know, they have really been talking a lot about why self-care is important, and particularly why it's important when you're working with young feminists and girls. And I think the other thing that we've also been reflecting on, and you know, we recently took representatives from 9 Within for Girls organizations to the Girls Not Brides global meeting in Malaysia. And you know, we really wanted to make sure that girls' voices were amplified, you know, that girls were present in that global meeting, that funders, that stakeholders, that policymakers are hearing their voice and listening to why they have to be at the center. And you know, between us and the organizers, you know, completely packed out their schedule. You know, we had a few kind of nice dinners and time there. And I think just when we reflected back, you know, we made sure safeguarding was on. You know, we had safe spaces and zones for like the girls to go to if they were feeling overwhelmed. And what we actually saw was that, you know, and this is just a reflection on us as we go towards doing more things like that. You know, at the end of the day, these are like, you know, 15, 16-year-old girls that are coming from really rural parts of the world. They're you know, like you've got girls that have escaped child marriage, like at a very, very young age. They've set up organizations that, you know, are against their families, their religions, their communities' kind of wishes to challenge some of those norms. Difficult environments, incredible individuals to do that. And, you know, on one side, we as development actors, as funders, want to give them a space and a profile and give them this opportunity to network and meet, you know, funders, and for them to hear their voice. And we just forget they're also just, that's a 14-year-old girl. They want to like chill out and be normal and see a new city. They've gone, you know, they've traveled out of their country for the first time. They want to, you know, they said to us, you know, we want more time for just like hanging out, singing, dancing, seeing our city. And like, why do we think that's a problem either? Like, you know, why isn't that sort of addressed in the same way? Yes, they are girls. Like, and we need to like, we're actively telling, you know, ourselves, like the way that we strategize, our decision makers and the rest of the sector, why girls' voices are important. When they're going, you know, like, it's okay for you guys to be able to do full on, like, you know, to fly in and to do 3 days back to back at conference and network and speak and do this. But like, this is, I'm like a 14-year-old girl and I'm already doing a really hard thing daily back at home. I don't have space, you know, emotionally or physically sometimes for. And then you're layering on like another level that they obviously feel, you know, it's that kind of FOMO thing, like the fear of missing out. Of course I want to participate. Of course I want to speak on stage. Of course I want to be given a platform and not miss this opportunity. But why don't we as development actors structure things in a way that honors people as individuals and gives them space to actually be a bit like, you're in Malaysia and you should hang out, go to street markets, see what Malaysia also has to offer, and engage and enjoy the place you are without a feeling of guilt that something like the Daily Mail would be like, you know, 9 child marriage survivors go on a jolly. Like, and that's the reality, is that we are trying to balance those very negative connotations like development, and our sector is under such scrutiny.
Yes.
You know, for a misuse of funds. And I do think that is where private funders, like for us, we aren't accountable to anyone but our founder, and, you know, and that, or the family. And, you know, there's a lot of private funding in philanthropy globally. And I think that there's that, we have a responsibility to be able to take risks that other funders might not be able to do until there's enough evidence to substantiate it, because they are taking money from the public, because they are taking money from taxpayers and from the government. And there's different levels of accountability when you do something. But I think there is something to be said about how, you know, that area of work does need to be addressed and demonstrated in order to really propel change that we all want to see.
Right, exactly. And it occurs to me when you were talking about that and sort of mentioning like the fear of people saying, oh, people might be going on a jolly or whatever. I think there's something about the way we think about like well-being and looking after people, as if it's, you know, the idea that that's something that isn't relevant to our sector because we're just trying really hard to solve the difficult problems in the world, and we should be doing that 24/7, all of us, otherwise we're doing something bad. I think it's something we have to challenge as well. I think people that and then even us, you know, but people flying around the world constantly in meetings, constantly under stress of etc., are actually, you know, struggling a lot of the time to be sustainable in themselves around the work they're doing, right? And there's something about sustainability, joining up this question about well-being and sustainability, that I think we mentioned when we were talking before. But like, it's not sustainable for us as individuals to be constantly, you know, focused only on, you know, the hard bit, right? That we actually need to support ourselves in order to be able to work for long-term change and some of these really difficult and transient issues that we're dealing with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is this sort of there is this fear of, you know, like I even would say, you know, when I took my team to Sicily at the beginning of the year, like, you know, I did have a bit of a fear of, you know, what are my peers in other foundations going to think about, you know, the fact that we're going through a really difficult time, everything that's happening, and we've just all gone to on a retreat. But it was so important that sort of we did do work planning. We did address like different kind of scenarios for, if we're able to do, if this opportunity arises, we do want to do this. If this opportunity does, if this, scenario planning. And all of that has really worked to our benefit. Everyone has been completely behind any new direction that we've taken, and has been able to be much more dynamic in the way that we address what our award winners are asking us to do, that our partners are asking us to do, that we're also reflecting from research. We've commissioned independent evaluation from a set of researchers at the moment about the With and For Girls program. And what's really interesting is that so much of what's coming up in the independent evaluation, it's not that, obviously sometimes organizations do it to verify that their hunches or their thoughts are there. Right. And obviously that has, a lot of the elements have been confirmed, but some of the recommendations are things that actually the team had already come up with in that space and that time away from the office, and that ability to be able to really like disengage from that kind of daily grind and be a bit like, well, actually, what about doing these areas? And not only have we been able to kind of have that space to develop them, because it was done at the beginning of the year, we've been able to pilot those activities, evaluate them, and we know that they're actually working, and not to kind of, also where in social justice, we're dealing with a really ever-changing environment. Like, as much as, you fund for the progression of civil liberties and civil rights, there is a global crackdown at the moment, like Civicus, the world kind of association of civil society organizations, it launched its report. Only like 3% of the world's countries live in an environment of open civic space, freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of peaceful assembly. And that's crazy, when you're working in social justice, all of those elements around civic space have a huge issue. And so you're dealing with, increasingly kind of state supported, but also, religious, cultural groups that are militia who are actively clamping down on civil society organizations, making it so hard. And we expect our grassroots and our local organizations that we partner with, that we award, to be able to deal with that situation and to innovate and to be able to kind of meet those changes head on and almost anticipate they're going to happen and have a solution for it rather than completely crumble. And yet we don't do that as funders or development actors sat in the global north, because maybe our environment, we don't feel, is shifting that much. But we're working in a context that's about a global context, and we need to be dynamic and we need to shift things quickly. And there is no way you're able to do that unless you and your organization and your team are given the space to be able to do that. And we all do it. You have away days, you have facilitation, you have workshops, those are the same elements. Why is it any different calling it a retreat and involving nice dinners and walks and some actual space that's around it, that's not just sat in your boardroom and being no one's to look at their emails today, but actually really fully embracing it? And what are you able to achieve by doing that? And again, I think that it's for those of us that are working within kind of social development, it is you're fighting for something that's at a core of your value, your personal values, and your identity. And it's almost more important for us to embrace those elements rather than others or people working in other spaces.
Yeah. And because you're bringing so much of yourself, whether it's a personal experience or more in the sense of your sort of passion or whatever, because you're bringing so much of that, I think it's very easy to get in this loop of it impacting your personal life and your professional life if you're kind of out of balance and not able to take breaks and look after yourself in some ways and look after each other, I guess, in in organisational spaces. Before we finish our conversation, I just wanted to ask you about at STARS, you talked about the retreat that you did earlier in the year, but are there other ways, like on a day-to-day basis, that you kind of implement some sort of wellbeing strategies or support for your people in the organisation?
So I think, like, you know, some of the things that we've and, you know, we at the retreat, it was like an opportunity to be a bit like, you know, a place for reflection, how people were feeling about it, what were their thoughts and ideas on how we maintain this, knowing that, you know, it's not possible to go on a retreat every year or every couple of months at all. Like, you know, it's a one-off that's about that kind of space, a one-off in a year maybe, but also just balancing it with the realities of the logistics of getting people and funding associated to it. But, you know, the team were just like, you know, we would love to have more kind of team lunches or team dinners and things that like take us away and are able to give us the space. And we do, you know, like we all still talk about elements to do with work. We innovate, we think about new ideas. Well, like even, you know, some of this well-being conversation around commissioning some support came out of conversations that started over like team lunches when we were all just reflecting over, you know, like, well, I've spoken to this grantee and they're feeling really overwhelmed, and like we were all feeling really tired at that time. There's certain moments of the year where you can feel in organization there's like a lethargy or a fatigue that just appears because you've been running and there's a moment of solace. And at those moments, you know, if you've got the space to just to not be working, not have an agenda that you're working through, to have a delicious meal together. You know, we're all foodies in the STARS Foundation team. Everyone loves food. So that's like a core element. We do that. But we've also, you know, brought in like yoga like therapists. We've brought in like naturopaths. We've brought in, you know, like people have access to kind of like counseling support services. People's training budgets are able to focus on things that to do with their self-care and their well-being, if that's what they want to focus on, as opposed to like actual, you know, professional, I want to go on, I don't know, project management training. So there's that embracing. I'm looking at the moment around getting a massage therapist to just come in and just be able to give people a bit of light relief through the day. You know, there's like a lot of we bring in like oil, like essential oils, lots of people like that, and having it in the office. There's the team really wanted plants in the office. You know, a lot of them have calmness, and you know, everyone who's come into the office in the last few months are like, oh my god, you guys have so many plants, and they're just everywhere. But it creates a different environment, and it's all the elements of really, and it goes back to that whole point of, even if we really want to be in partnership, like with organizations that we support, but also we want to be part of building solidarity around global movements. Those exist in our organizations themselves, and they need to be nurtured in a way that addresses people and is an open dialogue between people on what they think is important, and the spaces that feel important to them as well.
I love that, and it feels really important to me that we connect up these pieces about why our environment impacts how we do our work and stuff. So I love that you're thinking about that, and I think like often what's important is that you keep thinking about it. You know, for people listening, it's not like a perfection strategy kind of a thing, but it's bringing that conversation, you know, continuing to bring that conversation and enabling it to be there, isn't it? And not shutting it down, right?
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at like actually all social justice movements have been propelled by like communities and movements at the core, and like so many of those have such strong evidence around how actually that kind of that movement building and that community support is by nurturing, like people are nurturing one another. They're finding a place that feels safe in situations or environments that don't feel safe, whether that's your home, whether that's your family, whether it's your town, your society, your nation. You know, like it allows you to feel safe and feel nurtured, and you to be able to give that feeling to someone else. And I think, you know, when we think specifically about social justice movements, it like self-care has to be like at the core of it. And for organizations that want to support that movement, that might not be in it ourselves, but are funding or giving other elements of support in addition to funding for those movements, like we absolutely need to address it in the way that we think about how those programs are structured, but even in the way that we operate as well, because we're taking on some of those thoughts and processes and trying to understand what's going to be the best kind of support mechanisms for them as well.
Yeah, it's something about walking the talk, isn't it, that's really important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
No worries. Thank you so. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers at the conference as well.
Yeah,
thank
you too. Bye.
Bye.
Take 2. You've been listening to me, Marianne Clements, in conversation with Swatee Deepak, and this is the Healing Solidarity Conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to spend a bit more time with the ideas and suggestions we discussed in this talk or any of the others in Healing Solidarity Conference, don't forget you can make a contribution supporting the production of this conference and get access to recordings and ongoing conversations about these themes and ideas. Just click the link below this video to find out more. Thank you.